Hi, this is the sample for Chapter 2. This sample is written in response to the Beowulf question regarding the popularity of The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, written by Tolkien, and its relationship to Beowulf. That's Making Connections, question number 9. So my student, Dr. Bruce Banner, he kind of was a hulk of a man, wrote this piece. Now, I want to just go over some major points with you so that you can explore this in more depth on your own. The point, of course, is not to recreate this exact same paper, but again, to give you a sense of what a good essay looks like. In this case, an essay on Beowulf. So, some technical things, of course. We have the last name and page number in the upper right-hand corner. We have the name block, Bruce Banner, Professor Hoffman, English 101, the date in which it was done, right around the time we all left for COVID. The evolution of Beowulf. Now, as you see, Beowulf in the title is italicized. This is because this is referring to the name of the poem, not to the specific character, Beowulf, okay? If we refer to the specific character of Beowulf, that'll be typed in normal, regular type. But because it is a poem, and an epic poem at that, technically not a classical epic, but it is a large poem, we italicize it. Now, in our opening introductory paragraph, please remember we're trying to think of 3 things that we can do for the reader. The first is to hook the reader, get the reader interested, get the reader involved. Make the reader want to read your essay, not simply have to read your essay. Then you introduce your subject, because of course the reader does not know what you're going to be writing about. Now the topic is often given in the title, but the text of your essay, right, the introduction, will be more thorough in doing so. And then the thesis. Right, the argument, the main point you're trying to make. So there's 3 things that I'm trying to do in the very first paragraph of the essay. Hook, subject, thesis. So here's our hook. The hero is timeless. As a consequence, when it comes to the conception of a literary hero, no idea is original. So that's a bit of a, what shall we say, a kind of surprising statement. No idea is original. Granted, I could probably envision more exciting hooks, but there you go. Perhaps the most important landmark in the establishment of the hero archetype in the English language tradition is Beowulf. The famous poem of Beowulf is considered, quote, the most important surviving work of Anglo-Saxon or Old English literature, end quote, Clark 39. So please remember how this is done. You see the quotation marks here and here for the directly quoted material, parentheses, author's last name. There's no comma, there's just simply a space. There's no P or PG. It just has the number 39, which we know by definition is a page number. Then we have the closed parentheses and a period at the end of the whole thing. See how there's no period here? The period is here. Okay, that's just really simple stuff that you ought to know when you're using MLA format. This tale of obscure origins describes the life of Beowulf. Now you see this Beowulf, reference to the actual hero, is not italicized. A hero who slays a beast by the name of Grendel before also slaying Grendel's mother. All right, that's a pretty bloody mess. 50 years later, Beowulf dies in a battle with a dragon. From a battle with a dragon. He actually beats the dragon, that is to say, kills the dragon, but he is wounded and passes away, not before having time for plenty of big speeches. J.R.R. Tolkien borrowed heavily from Beowulf when he wrote The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings, of course, a well-known trilogy. Thorough study of both Tolkien's Middle-earth adventures and Beowulf's ancient tale clearly shows that the heroes of The Lord of the Rings and its predecessor, The Hobbit, find significant aspects of their literary heroism in Beowulf's protagonist. Okay, so there's your introduction Hook, subject, thesis. I'd say it's not perfect, but it's very strong, and especially the ideas. What do we have also? We have the concession. All right, concession of the arguments against this. Are there any arguments opposed to this? Well, it might be how it's done, how it's put together. So let's see. One could argue, right, so taking the other side, that since Beowulf itself is such a difficult poem to work with, Tolkien's interpretation of the characters heroics is a moot point, as we'll never fully understand what the anonymous author of Beowulf was trying to convey. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the poem Beowulf, the earliest surviving manuscript is from about 1000 AD, but based on textual evidence, the poem could be as old as from 600 AD. Okay, nobody knows the name of the person who wrote the version of Beowulf that we have. It's highly suggested that there were previous earlier versions, which is very likely considering it's 400 years possible, especially of an oral tradition. And there are other reasons that, since we're not a literature class, we don't need to go into. Oren Falk. Now this I love, by the way. Introducing an author's name, because most of these people we've never heard of. Don't know who these people are. So here, at least, we get a little bit of help. A professor at Cornell University. Cornell, one of the Ivy League schools, pretty good, right? Gives a little credibility to the quote, right? Because not all sources are equally good, right? They're not all equally credible. But if you get an English teacher from an Ivy League school, right, that probably is a little better than just some random dude talking. Oren Falk, a professor at Cornell University, describes the ages-old poem as, quote, difficult material to work. There is so little we know with confidence about it, and so much of what each of us does know with any degree of certainty is flatly contradicted by what others fancy they do, no less securely, end quote. It is challenging to point to Tolkien's 20th century characters and draw lines back to literary classic of unknown age and origin. However, the collective perception of Beowulf as a hero is not as important in this regard. Just as each person will perceive Bilbo and Frodo differently in Tolkien's books, Tolkien had his own view of Beowulf that he kept in mind while creating the beloved protagonist of Middle-earth. The inspiration is what counts. Nice little wrap up there. Now we start to turn to the main body. Now, I'm not going to read the whole poem or essay. That takes too long and, of course, isn't really necessary. I do want to highlight a few things. First of all, as a reference to Tolkien's highly influential essay, Beowulf, right? And they talk about this in something called Hobby and Bloom, right? Hobby and Bloom, two authors. So when you have an in-text citation where there are two authors, both authors are in fact included, okay? Not just the first author. Think how bad you would feel if you were the second author and you got passed over. That wouldn't be very nice. It is logical that Tolkien would want to reignite this culture himself in Lord of the Rings. In his essay, Tolkien proclaims the following, quote, and then this is an indented quote, okay? And typically indented quotes are 4 lines long or longer. You indent them from the left-hand margin, as you see here. Because this is the start of a paragraph, the first line is indented even further. You always have some sort of introduction to the indented quote. In his essay, Tolkien proclaims the following. And typically there is a colon, which is used to introduce this kind of a quote. Okay, not a comma. Page number 36. His Beowulf, The Monsters and the Critics was published in 1936, which preceded any of his original publications for stories making up the Lord of the Rings saga. Therefore, it's possible to theorize Tolkien was pondering Beowulf and writing his masterpiece at the same time. And there is a lot of discussion about that, to be honest, in the literary world, okay? Partly because there's this feeling by many people who have read Lord of the Rings that there's something about prefiguring the Nazis right? And that's not hard to imagine. Good, solid topic sentences. Tolkien's characters would come to embody a combination of ancient hero archetypes and his own devout Catholicism. Okay, so now we have the religious aspect, according to Clarke, right? Some other quotes from Clarke. Clarke 40 over here. This quote here, and I just bring this up to show you, it has a word epitomizes in square brackets. The square brackets signifies that the word is actually not in the original, but that the student, Mr. Bruce Banner, added that word for clarity. But of course, you can't just go throwing words into quotes. And so that's why there is a signal to us, the square brackets. It says, okay, epitomizes is really not in the quote. I use that to have it make sense, but, you know, there it is. Obviously, when you add words to quotes, you can't do it to change or mischaracterize the original, okay? It's just there to help the reader to understand, quite frankly, the grammar of the sentence, right? Now, because there are many pieces by Tolkien, you also have to have pieces of the title of the work, and I'll show you how that works a little later on. Okay. Some more references. I'm not kind of crazy about the abbreviation Lord of the Rings here, to be perfectly honest with you, but, you know, we can live with that. So we have the middle body, the main body, the arguments there, and then the conclusion here. Remember, there's three things we're trying to do in the conclusion of an essay. Restate the thesis, step back and look at the picture, and provide a clincher. Despite being published in the mid-20th century, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings have inspired and continue to inspire new generations of readers. Okay. It's important to recall the hero archetype that we see in these novels, as well as the movies based on the writing, relies on the descriptions found in Beowulf, the famous poem from centuries ago. This hero has persisted into the 21st century, and it seems determined to stay. It's thanks to Tolkien's revival of that hero that when someone mentions heroic feats, our first thought may be a brave knight battling a ferocious dragon for the keys to the kingdom. It has relevance to our everyday life. As Mary Pottles puts it, quote, our ordinary lives really do have a form off the big screen. We're in training for monsters, hoping we also could come through in extraordinary circumstances in the event of the big exam that may never come. The duality of mankind, the age-old battle between good and evil, ensures that the story of the hero will forever remain relevant. And there's the word count. And then I want to just spend a couple minutes looking at the works cited page. So here we have double-spaced, alphabetical order, hanging indentations. We have good, solid academic material here, right? We have the George Clarke piece, right? It leads off in alphabetical order. There's the title of the article. There's the name of the journal from JSTOR. Orrin Falk, article, title, journal information. This is from EBSCOhost. It has a DOI, Digital Object Indicator, which is like a permanent URL, so we go ahead and include that. You do not have to give me an access date for a DOI, since by definition it stays the same. Hobby and Blake, or Blake Hobby and Harold Bloom, Rebirth and Renewal from Facts on File. That was ultimately recovered from EBSCOhost, right? So this is a print source, right, which is like a book, but ultimately we found it here in EBSCOhost. Mary Elizabeth Puddles, I don't even know what to say with that last name. Training for Monsters, American Enterprise, again, volume, number, date, page, EBSCOhost. So again, when you have something from EBSCOhost, if you don't have a DOI, don't